What is sacred science? It is a theory of everything that we perceive with our senses. Senses here are intended material and non-material one. Our current civilization emphasizes the importance of only the 5 material senses. The non-material ones are no longer considered important for our daily lives. Sacred science was the only kind of science in the not-so-distant past. Today's modern science is a partial, simplified, distorted and incomplete version born from the sacred one. To truly understand all the ugliness behind alcohol consumption, we need to review some basic concepts of sacred science that are no longer commonly known. The parasitic entities that introduced alcohol into general consumption are the same ones who conceal the sacred science from humanity in order to smoothly push their agenda. Concealing and distorting real knowledge is the easiest way to subjugate humanity. So let us review some basic concepts. Reincarnation. What we consider our current life is just one reincarnation of our soul on Earth. Almost every person currently living on Earth has experienced many reincarnations over time. This sequence of reincarnations has 2 main goals for the soul. The first one is educational. I will omit the details here because they are not necessary for this presentation. The second one is to determine in which spiritual realms the soul will ultimately reside, in the higher realms, also called angelic realms, or in the lower realms, also called demonic realms. This is an essential point for this presentation. Perception and consciousness level. The only tool at our disposal to achieve the 2 goals just mentioned is our perception. I will assume that everyone has an intuitive understanding of what perception is. Every decision and action we make changes our perception in one of 2 ways, expanding it or degrading it. Expanding perception moves us toward higher realms. This is also called increase of consciousness level. Degrading perception moves us toward the lower realms. This is also called decrease of consciousness level. Today, in the era of Kali Yuga, parasitic forces are doing everything they can to drag every single soul into their realms. The means by which they do this is by maximally obliterating someone's perception. The topics of consciousness level and parasitic agenda are widely covered in New Earth videos. Soul marks. During reincarnation, we face many challenges that we try to solve. In doing so, we make decisions that result in us taking actions. These decisions and actions leave traces on our soul, which we call soul marks. Soul marks are very important for our experience on Earth because they are directly responsible for everything that happens to us on a daily basis and what we are surrounded by. Soul marks are in the state of constant change depending on our decisions and actions. This means that some existing ones can be erased or some new ones can be added, all in response to how we live our life. For those familiar with Eastern philosophy, soul marks and karma are somewhat related concepts. As I have never studied karma in detail, I cannot claim that they are exactly the same. To have a simple idea when we talk about the soul marks, we can consider them as a kind of scale or level that tells whether the soul is moving towards higher or lower realms. This analogy is a bit oversimplified, but useful to keep in mind. The law of structures and forms. This law will explain to us how the soul acquires soul marks. Let me start with a simple example. Imagine a guy who is always very kind to elderly people, listens to them carefully, and is happy to help them whenever needed. In his free time, he also volunteers at a nursing home. So, the guy is very empathetic towards elderly people. What is also important to emphasize is that this empathy fills his soul with joy, and that he doesn't expect anything in return. In terms of the law of structures and forms, empathy is a structure, and kindness to the elderly people is one form or one realization of empathy encountered on earth. The structure of empathy can take many other forms, for example, empathy towards refugees or empathy towards abandoned animals, etc. So, to one structure corresponds huge number of different forms. Also, one form can be shared among many different structures. In general, structures can be considered abstract logical concepts and forms their realization on Earth. Humans have an innate ability to easily perceive structures and forms. However, we lack practice and experience in this domain because our present-day civilization has almost completely erased these concepts. Let's go back to the guy from the example. Because of his sincere empathy for the elderly people, he will acquire the mark of empathy on his soul. Once he has acquired this mark, it's important to emphasize the following 2 points. First, the empathy will be tested in other forms different than helping the elderly. I will omit further discussion of this point. Second, which is even more interesting, is that throughout his life he will receive empathy from others whenever the need arises. This means that once a soul mark is acquired at some point in life, it creates a reality for us in accordance with that mark. That reality will follow us throughout the rest of our life and through subsequent reincarnations until some change related to the mark occurs. I emphasize that the example we just discussed to explain the law of structures and forms is oversimplified. Although the matter is much more complicated, what we have said is quite sufficient to understand the harmful effects behind alcohol consumption. What kind of soul mark alcohol consumption imprints on the soul? Let us apply the law of structures and forms on alcohol consumption. So, we need to identify what is a form and what is a corresponding structure, just like in the previous example of empathy. Obviously, alcohol consumption is a form. To determine the structure to which it belongs, let us look at the effects that alcohol has on our behavior. Among the various effects, 2 can be distinguished. First, perception becomes dulled, not as sharp as in a normal state of consciousness. Our perception is degraded while we are under the influence of alcohol. It is enough to think of drunk driving. Second, most alcohol users will say that after a few drinks they are more relaxed, forgetting about everyday worries. Now, let us consider the occasional drinker, one who prefers to consume alcohol in social settings, attends these events of his own free will, and looks forward to them. So, the first effect of alcohol we listed was that it dulls senses. Therefore, occasional drinker willingly and joyfully looks forward to events where he can degrade his own perception, or to say it equivalently, where he can lower his consciousness level. I'm not familiar with an appropriate word in the English language to describe this structure, so let us call it, for the purpose of this presentation, the structure of desired self-degradation. Once his soul has acquired the mark of desired self-degradation, many different forms of this structure will begin to appear in his life. They will all have the same effect, to lower his level of consciousness, which he obviously willingly yearns for, and move him towards the lower realms. He will begin to experience daily stress, fear, envy and hatred from those around him, all kinds of chaotic situations, etc. These daily events of soul degradation will make him live a very unpleasant reality. Even a soul with high consciousness level would begin to degrade in this type of reality, let alone a developing one. He will begin to react to constant fear with aggression, to hatred directed at him with hatred. Chaos will only increase his stress level, which will reduce his effectiveness in fighting life's problems. As a result of all this, health problems will begin to appear, etc. There is no end to it. As a consequence, he will also begin to receive other negative marks on his soul, so he will enter a state called a negative spiral. All of this will accelerate the sinking of his consciousness level and almost certainly ensure that he will ultimately reach the demonic realms. The soul mark mentioned here due to alcohol consumption is unfortunately not the only one. I encourage viewers to try to find at least one other structure for which alcohol consumption is one of the possible forms.